Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear and see us? Okay. In that case, I'll begin. If anyone has any issues, please just chat and say that you can't hear us or can't see us. Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good Friday so far. I'm Anis. Welcome to the second event for the Johor Bahru Sexual Harassment Awareness Campaign. It's titled Dealing with Workplace Harassment in Law Firms. As many of you will be aware, we had launched the Sexual Harassment Awareness Campaign last Thursday with our first webinar. And we are very grateful to have Amelia join us for our second event today. Before I begin, I would like to encourage all of you to visit our mini site, which we had launched as part of this campaign. The URL for that site is actnow.johorbar.org.my. This site includes various information in relation to sexual harassment and importantly includes a Get Help section which details the avenues and options one has in the event that they have been sexually harassed. And also the site includes a Sign the Pledge page. I would like to strongly encourage everyone to please sign the pledge and pledge against sexual harassment. Now, onto some house rules. Amelia will be presenting for about 40 minutes or so, following which we'll have a short Q&A session. So during the session, if you have any questions, if you are on Crowdcast, please click on the Ask a Question button and leave your question there. If you're on Facebook and joining us from Facebook, please just drop a comment and we will try our best to answer your question as well. Secondly, at the end of the session, for those of you who want your CPD points, please don't forget to fill up the attendance form as usual. We'll provide the link at the end of the webinar. So before we start with the webinar, I would like to introduce our speaker for the day, Ms. Amelia. Amelia was admitted as an advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaysia in 2015 and then worked as a compliance executive for a multinational GLC in Malaysia. During her legal practice, she majored in corporate litigation and corporate advisory. As a compliance executive, she was entrusted with corporate governance, specifically in relation to designing and socializing policies across operations. In her capacity as managing partner of Speak Up Malaysia, Amelia combines her legal, compliance, and corporate governance training into helping organizations create a safe and productive environment. Her expertise includes developing anti-sexual harassment policies and code of conduct and establishing grievance and whistleblowing mechanism, amongst others. Amelia has conducted various training and has been appointed as consultant by private and public entities as well as regulatory bodies. She was engaged to be part of the special committee to draft the sexual harassment bill in Malaysia by the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development while working closely with the Attorney General Chambers. Ladies and gentlemen, it is evident from my brief introduction that our speaker today is extremely well read on this topic, and as such, we are very grateful to have her join us today. With that, Amelia, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anis, for the introduction, and hi everyone. So today we will be talking about not just sexual harassment, but the wider scope of harassment that happens at the workplace. I will be sharing the screen just so that there's something for you to refer to as we're doing the presentation. Okay. Can someone confirm that you can see my screen? Okay, awesome. So speaking of understanding and dealing with harassment in law firms, the first thing that I want to highlight is the idea of a toxic workplace environment. And we've heard many stories about different things that happen in the workplace, which we, especially as lawyers, deem as normal. That's just how it is being a lawyer, but not really attributing certain practices in the workplace as being absolutely toxic or things that contribute to a workplace culture that is hostile and very intimidating. This is some of the things that I picked up based on like different investigations that we've done and things like that, are some of the most common things that happen in a workplace that makes the workplace become toxic. I have here favoritism, microaggression, bullying, office rumors, casual sexism, sabotaging other people, fraternizing, and all of that, unfair work distribution. So all these things, when they happen individually, they may seem like they're not a big deal, but if it happens, all at the same time, it will definitely create an environment that is not productive for certain individuals. So I'm going to give an example based on investigation that we have done. So if and in an environment where people feel like there's favoritism, and unfair work distribution, for example, so it may seem like those issues are not related or not relevant to things like sexual harassment or harassment at the workplace, but that issue becomes like the underlying issue as to why there's no trust between employees as well as the management. So if people who are working in that organization feels like the bosses practice favoritism, for example, that the bosses always give the better case or the better briefs to certain lawyers, and other lawyers have to do like the nitty-gritty files, for example, then this perception of favoritism, and I say perception because sometimes it may not necessarily be true, but the perception of favoritism is enough to create a situation where there is no trust between employees and the management. And when that happens, when there is an issue like sexual assault or sexual harassment at the workplace, then these issues become something that people just don't trust the management to handle. And oftentimes, this will create a situation when that very problem will be blown out of proportion because people just won't come and report it to the bosses directly. So it creates a situation where the management loses out on the opportunity to deal with these issues internally, because people would probably just talk about it on their social media, or worse, they could just like go around talk about their experience without formally reporting it through a channel. And we have to take a step back and think about, when people do not report these cases, is it and I think oftentimes we're always quick to blame this on the people, right? Oh, why didn't you just report it to the organization? But I think we all have to realize the fault that we play in creating an environment that is so toxic to a point that people feel like there's no point to report, or even if they report, nothing's going to happen, or if they report, they're going to expect some kind of backlash against them. And that is in essence the idea of a toxic workplace environment that I think we should set as the background of this conversation today. What is workplace harassment? So workplace harassment comes in many forms, but usually I like to define things by identifying the common ingredients. So when you're looking at harassment, you're looking at when there is any form of hostility or aversion from one party to another person or another group of individuals. Like, don't get me wrong, workplace conflict is inevitable because we all disagree with our colleagues all the time. We would have different opinions on how we should approach a case, on a strategy and things like that. Those things are inevitable, but it is not normal for workplace conflict or disagreement to translate into a culture of bullying or a culture of microaggression or a culture of passive aggressiveness, which I have seen happen, a lot. So bullying happen when obviously there's a power imbalance, when one party is in the position to treat another party in a way that is, I guess, negative, right? So this superiority is not just something that comes from a proper hierarchy. So for example, if I am the managing partner in a firm, it's, of course, it's easy to identify that I have higher power, I have a bigger power as compared to everyone else in the firm. But sometimes this power is something that could be manufactured, or that could be created other ways. Some people are just generally give out a more dominant and a more superior vibe. Some people have more experience, some people are older and things like that. So when you are trying to identify power imbalance, do bear all of these other things in mind. So creating a I think I'm just going to skip straight to sexual harassment. What is sexual harassment? So sexual harassment can be divided into two main categories. If you read different literatures, there are some people who will say there are 3 or 4, in fact. But I like to simplify it into 2 because I think they're quite encompassing of the situation. The first one is a quid pro quo harassment, which involves an express or implied demands for sexual favor in benefit of something. So that's very straightforward, right? Quid pro quo. You give me something, I give you something else in return. And when there is something, when something that is expected as part of this quid pro quo arrangement is something sexual, then automatically that becomes sexual harassment. At the workplace, we come up with quid pro quo arrangement all the time. You give me this case file, the next time I have a big file, I'll share it with you too. That's a quid pro quo arrangement too. But of course, that doesn't involve sexual favors. So that's fine. But also bear in mind that sometimes it's not just in exchange of a benefit, but it could be in exchange of a harm or a detriment. So I'll give you 2 examples. So example 1 is, you want to get a promotion, you come out and have drinks with me and we'll see where things go. The other example is, if you don't want to get fired, or if you don't want to get all the really bad, shitty file in the firm, you better do. So these are 2 different types of pro quo exchange, but obviously ultimately it puts the person or the victim in a situation where they have to do something. Otherwise, they won't get certain benefit, or they will be subjected to certain kind of detriment. The second example is what we call a hostile environment. And this is a lot more common because this happens when someone shows any kind of conduct that basically create hostility surrounding that person. So usually sexual harassment that happens in the second context happens when that person did not expect anything in return. Like, it could also be a situation where they pass a sexual remark without ever having the intention of sleeping with this person or engaging in any kind of sexual kind of relationship. You just say it because you think it's funny in that moment. You say it because you can, basically. Like I said, sexual harassment, even though it is sexual in nature, more often than not is a wrongdoing or a crime, depending on the context, of power, of dominance. So people do it more often than not because they can, or because they're in the position, to do it. So that comes under the second category, which is hostile environment, and it creates a very bad psychologically, physically, mentally workplace culture for the person who was subjected to it. So how do we identify sexual harassment? So sexual harassment, a lot of people say it's quite difficult to be identified. And of course, depending on the different literature that you're reading, you will get different definition. Even in Malaysia, for example, if you look at the federal court judgment, in terms of the elements that have been identified for sexual harassment there, it's quite different from this. But where I'm coming from with these 3 elements are based on what we put or what we're proposing to be part of the sexual harassment bill, which we hope to be tabled and debated in Parliament in the upcoming sitting. So there are 3 elements that make up sexual harassment. The first one is that, of course, it is something sexual. Otherwise, it will just be a form of harassment, not sexual harassment. And whether or not something is sexual, again, depending on the cultural context, background context, value context of an individual, it is important to realize that the word sexual is subjective. It's subjective because for certain people, a touch may not be sexual, a touch may be friendly, but for another individual, that same touch could be sexual, that same touch could be non-friendly, that same touch could be I guess, unwelcome in that context. So when someone comes to you and talk about how they feel like they have been sexually harassed, make sure that you are not imposing your value system and your culture onto this person by saying things like, I don't think that's sexual. I mean, it's a hug. I mean, it's a touch on the shoulders. That's completely fine. If you're doing that, that means you're imposing your culture and your belief system on this person, and that's completely unfair because we all know some people are more religious than others, some people are more conservative than others, some people are more liberal than others, and not one is better than the other in any given context. They are all legitimate, so we have to always respect this perspective of this person, their lived experiences, their culture, and their value system. That's the first one. The second one is the fact that it is unwanted. Whether or not something is wanted or unwanted depends on the perspective of the victim, i.e. the person at the receiving end, because for sure you can't be the person who decide if someone wants something or not, right? Because for sure that person is the best and only person who can decide whether or not he or she want a particular thing or otherwise. So unwantedness is very, very important because you have to prioritize the perspective of the victim here. Usually someone asks me, what if the sexual harasser or the perpetrator did not intend to sexually harass another person? They did it because they thought it was harmless, but turns out, the victim did not welcome that particular conduct. What happens in that situation? Does it matter that this person have any intention or otherwise? And my position, of course, personally, is that of course the element of intention means something, because a person who does not intend to hurt another person is obviously shouldn't be punished or shouldn't be meted out with a kind of punishment that is as harsh as someone who actually have an active intention to hurt another person. But in a bigger context, if you ended up still sexually harassing another person, even without intention, we still have to prioritize the fact that harm has been done onto another person. So this is where the element of unwantedness is very important. It's paramount when you talk about sexual harassment, because you sort of you prioritize the element of the bodily autonomy of that person, the control that person have over their body, the control this person have over their dignity. And of course, to fully understand the element of unwantedness, you need to fully understand the element of consent and the 5 elements of consent. And if you are able to unpack all of those things, you should be able to understand whether or not something is wanted or unwanted. And lastly is the fact that it must have a negative impact onto the victim. And this negative impact could be categorized into 2 things. The first one is it could be a negative impact onto the person itself, or it could be a negative impact onto the environment surrounding the person. So it could be the well-being of the survivor itself. It could be the survivor's psyche, mental health, and things like that. Or it could be employment consequences, or things that create a toxic or a hostile work environment, right? So to put it into one full sentence, sexual harassment means any form of unwanted or unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature which threatens the well-being of any person at the workplace. Of course, I put this in the context of the workplace. And if all 3 elements are established, then that is sexual harassment. So if you are the victim, or if you are the person who observed sexual harassment, or if you're the person who has been accused of sexual harassment, more often than not, the question that we will ask ourselves, is that sexual harassment though? Is that really sexual harassment? So I think breaking things down into these three elements might make it easier for you to identify whether or not something is sexual harassment. One last thing that I want to talk about here before I move on is the idea of a workplace. In almost all of the investigations that I have been involved in, the harassment doesn't just happen in the office context. The story always start somewhere, or the story will be taken somewhere, which is why it is important for us to define the word workplace in an open way. For example, workplace should not just be limited to the office space, but it should include any kind of settings that is related to the course of work. So for example, is lunch breaks, or if part of your work you have to go to after work social events, you have to go for outside of work arrangements, business trip, outside meetings, all of those things are done in the course of work. So therefore, when you are trying to look at the definition of a workplace, it should cover all of those things. And my experience, as I said earlier, is usually something started when everyone go out and have drinks after work, and then things started there, and then it continued into the workplace and things like that. Or sometimes we go on an office trip and everyone's staying at an hotel and something happens then. It like I say, it's very important to acknowledge that the settings that are related to the course of work, and know that as management, as employers, you should be responsible over those kind of settings as well, because that is the very definition of a holistic management that is really genuinely care about the well-being of your employees and your staff members. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some sexual harassment behavior. And of course, these are some of the more popular ones, not popular in a good way, obviously. The first one is very direct: inappropriate touching, petting, pinching, stroking, brushing up against the body, hugging, kissing, fondling. So this one involves any kind of touch, really. Brushing up against the body is a bit more subtle. I've done this wasn't really an investigation. It was more of like a mediation between the party, where there was this person. He's very tall, and they work in an office setting that is pretty tight. And every Monday they have like operations meeting, and this guy always sits at the back near the door, near the exit, basically. And because he's very tall and the space is quite cramped, every time someone wants to come in and out of the room, they would have to sort of like brush their body against his legs. And when they ask him to move, they'll be like, just walk, it's fine, I don't mind, just walk. Not realizing the fact that it is other people who feel uncomfortable about it. And they had to take it up to HR because he wasn't taking it seriously, and we sort of like mediated the situation. And I think sometimes we don't realize that. We think that we are okay, but we don't realize that it's the other party who feels uncomfortable about it. So I think brushing up against the body, hugging, kissing, fondling. Actually, it's brushing up against the body, petting, pinching is the one that is more, I guess, is more subtle. Other forms include sexual advances or propositions for sexual activity, pressuring another person into sexual activity or talking about their sexual activity, making suggestive remarks, sex innuendos and sex jokes, openly discussing or making remarks about your sex life. This one is very common. It's common in a sense that there's like, I think the situation is always like, oh, like I'm talking about like, for example, I'm in the workplace. I have a colleague that is also a very close friend of mine. We tell each other everything. If I go out on a date, I'm gonna tell this other person. If I got lucky, I'm gonna tell this person. So we talk about details of our sexual life openly in the office to each other, and it was clear that both of us consented to this conversation because we both are doing it, right? But if that conversation happened in context where there are other people in the office space who could hear us and therefore become uncomfortable, then that could create an environment that is hostile, toxic, and could create a form of sexual harassment to these other people. There was a situation when that happens, and the defense of the person being accused of that is, I can't possibly sexually harass this person because this conversation doesn't even involve this person. This person just accidentally heard what I said, so it can't be sexual harassment. And I think that's a very dismissive stance to take. And of course, in that situation, we handled it in a situation where people understand that the workplace is a public space. Therefore, the ethics of a public space is applicable in the workplace. So it's not whether or not you intend this person to hear it or not. It's more of a question. If you say it out loud in public, then of course there is, maybe a more implicit understanding that other people's going to hear it, and you expect them to be okay with it, and that's not okay. Next is leering, ogling with suggestive overtone, such as licking lips, eating food provocatively, hand signal denoting sexual activity, consistent flirting when it is not reciprocated. This is funny because, of course, a lot of situation happen because the one party thinks they're just flirting and the other person feels like legitimately sexually harassed by it. And people often ask me, oh, but how do I know if I'm just flirting or if I'm sexually harassed this woman? Like, how do you know, that question? And I think that's quite a that's quite a daft question, to be honest, because I think the context is consent, and it's quite hard to say that you cannot flirt, because obviously people flirt, and that's fine. But I think when it is not reciprocated and you consistently do it, then that becomes a harassment. Which is why a lot of the discussion surrounding harassment, people will always ask, does it have to be repetitive? What if the harassment is just one time, but I feel sexually harassed? Can I do something about it? And I think the answer to that has to always look at the severity or the gravity of the situation. If the sexual harassment, for example, involves touching of a person's breast, then of course that's serious enough to be considered harassment, even if that happened once. But in the context of flirting, for example, I would say that if someone flirts with you one time and then you say, I'm sorry, I'm just not interested, please stop doing this, I don't appreciate this, and they stop, then obviously that's not sexual harassment. Do you get what I mean? But if you say, please stop, I don't appreciate this, I don't like you, I'm married, or whatever it is, and this person consistently do it to you, then obviously then that becomes sexual harassment. So I think there's always a more tasteful way to flirt, and a tasteful way of pursuing someone that you think you love and things like that. So it's very important to do it in a way where you pay close attention to the element of consent as to whether or not this party wants it or is asking you to stop and things like that. Next, display of pornographic material. This is direct, persistent, unwanted social invitation. This also happens in one of the investigation where this person consistently invites this other party to come and have drinks at his place. Oh, come, we'll just have drinks, just you and me. It's just drinks, it's nothing. And this is another example that it doesn't involve any touching, for example, but it could lead, it is a form of sexual harassment behavior and could lead to something else happening, could lead to because it makes people feel unsafe, when you do that. Lastly, relentless proposals for dates or physical intimacy. Next, responding to workplace harassment. So a lot of people often ask, how do you respond to workplace harassment? And usually we tell them 4 things that you can do. The first one is tell the harasser firmly that such behavior is unwelcome and immediately stop from doing so. For me, this is very important because it is how you balance out the rights of both individuals. because sexual harassment is focused on the perspective of the victim, whether or not the victim wants it, whether it is wanted, unwanted, desirable, undesirable by the victim cannot assume that people know what you're thinking or what you're feeling. So it is best to openly communicate whether or not something is wanted or not wanted by you. So it's quite hard to deal with a sexual harassment case if you saying like, oh, this person is sexually harassing me, and then you go to this person's like, wait, I have no idea, I'm so sorry, I wouldn't have done it if I know that she's not comfortable or he's not comfortable. So I think sometimes a lot of things could be just mitigated if you just initiate that communication and say, I'm sorry, I don't appreciate this, I'm not looking for anything here, if you could just be colleagues, that would be really great, things like that. So tell this person, explicitly set the boundaries, so that you're giving this person a chance to withdraw. And if they do not withdraw, if they continue with that behavior, then for sure, then that is a deliberate act of sexual harassment. So that's one. The second thing is, don't be embarrassed to react in front of another person, because usually that's how you get someone to either come to your defense or to support you in some way or another. And I think here it is also important for you to get your support system, talk to someone, if necessary. And if you wanted support, seek it out. Number 3 is to record specific details of the harassment. So this is important because based on my experience, usually at a point in which a victim decides to do something about it, it is usually a situation where the harassment has a trend. That means it has happened for a period of time already. It has happened for the past 2 months or the past 2 weeks or the past 6 months, depending on the psyche of the victim and how soon they decided to take action, right? So recording specific details help because it could establish that trend of harassment. And my best advice here is usually you send an email to yourself every time it happens, so that if you decide to take actions later on, you have evidence of it being recorded at a date and time of the incident itself. This is also a precaution because there's so many times when a victim comes forward and say, this has been happening to me for the last 6 months, and people responded to that with doubt by saying things like, oh, this is just an afterthought. If it happens for the past 6 months, where's your evidence? It's very hard because we all know sexual harassment usually happens in private. So I think recording the specific details in your email could establish it as a contemporaneous evidence, to show as and when it happens, rather than people saying that you're coming up with all of these facts there and then, to say that it has happened for the past 6 months. Of course, it's not right for people to do that, but they do that. And I guess this is one of the ways in which we can address that. Of course, it sucks that victims have to put in the extra effort to record the details of the harassment, no matter how traumatic it is. But unfortunately, I think that's the only way to show that trend, because no one else can provide that evidence aside from that victim in this situation. Of course, here, if you don't trust the server of the company, don't send it using your company email. You can send it using your personal email. And as and when you're ready to come and speak up on the harassment, you can do it by go reporting it to the grievance mechanism, reporting it to HR, or report it to the managing partner, report it with the disciplinary board or the women's committee or the gender equality committee, or whoever really that is in the position to help out. So I think these are the 4 things that can be done. I'm gonna go to how can law firm respond to reports. Excuse me. Management should take all complaints seriously. No complaints should be dismissed without any investigation or at least some kind of fact finding. The investigation, of course, has to be done objectively and independently. No preferential treatment regardless of level of authority. Obviously here it's very important to manage perception itself. Like I said earlier, if there's already a perception where people do not trust the management, then you probably want to take further actions like appointing an independent third party to conduct the investigation, for example. So there's thing that you do, you must manage that perception, because we all know justice is not just done, but has to be seen to be done. It's applicable in this situation as well. You should provide people with the ability to complain anonymously, and obviously usually in this situation we tell people things like, you can report anonymously, but it may hamper on our ability to contact you back to get additional information and things like that, which is why usually if people want to report anonymously, I advise them to create an anonymous email address so that at least the line of communication can be maintained even though you are anonymous. So for example, if today I want to anonymously lodge a complaint against my manager, for example, I can create like anonymous 100@gmail.com, and I will give that my complaint anonymously, but I can say if you need further clarification or if there's anything I can help in the course of investigation, you can contact me here. And I think maintaining that open communication is important as well. And the most importantly is to give assurances of non-retaliation. That means do not retaliate against a person who complain of sexual harassment, especially when the complaint is made in good faith. This means that even if the complaint is later on proven to be untrue, if at the time this person makes the complaint, he or she honestly and genuinely believes that he or she has been sexually harassed, then no form of retaliation should be given to this person, because obviously you can't just punish people for that. And also, if you think about it, we don't punish people for genuinely thinking that something wrong has been done to them, right? So it's very important to make sure that you as management do not retaliate against this person who complained, but to also create an environment where other people also do not react or do not retaliate to this person who lodged that complaint. And I think if you manage to create that situation where you can provide assurances and protection, then you will create a situation where it is easy for, or at least easier for people to, to come forward and report. And that is essentially what the hashtag Believe Survivor is about. Because I've always said this, that believing survivor does not mean that you immediately believe what the survivor said without having to do any form of investigation. Because for sure, some level of investigation is required before you take actions. That's just good practice. But believe survivor means that at a point in which you receive the complaint, you make it as easy and as comfortable for the complainant to put his or her case forward, to collect the evidence, to present the evidence, to talk to you. You're not pushy, you're respectful, you don't doubt them. You give them ample space and respect to, to work through their case. And essentially that is what Believe Survivor means. So this is an example of a grievance channel. So usually I call it like the 3-layer of defense. Usually you don't want to just say, oh, if everyone is unhappy, just go talk to this person, only one person. Because obviously sometimes that person is the person that people don't trust the most, right? So allowing multiple channels in which people can report their grievances is very important. And these grievances obviously include sexual harassment complaints. So they can either go straight to their team leader, they can go to the HR person, they can go to the partner, they can go to the managing partner, or they can, or some organizations that I have worked with, because they have a lot of sexual harassment complaints. What we have done is also appoint an external person to receive this complaint on behalf of the organization. So of course, these things can be arranged depending on your level of commitment to address the situation. These are some of the principles that you have to abide by when you are doing investigation and when you handle the grievance channel: objectivity, impartiality, transparency, confidentiality, anonymity, and accountability. I will not go through them because if you read best practices, literally, like, this is like a whole book on its own. But if you want to have further conversations about how do you materialize these principles in your SOPs, in your company policy, of course, I'd be happy to have a chat with you about that. And last but not least, I would like to end this conversation with you today with the question: whether or not sexual harassment can be prevented? And my honest answer is no, because obviously people don't come to work with a label on their forehead, that tells you exactly what the issues are, the insecurities, the way they were raised, and all of that. People don't walk into the office saying like, I'm a racist, but obviously people carry these values into the workplace. And if someone is sexist outside of work, chances are they're going to be sexist inside of the office space as well. So knowing that we can't really control people from that front, preventing workplace harassment then boils down to three main components, and that is your personal attitude, establishing a speak up culture, and last but not least is to have policies and procedures that create an environment that allows people to take action. Having a policy is very important because my experience usually tell me that at a point when a victim is going through this process where she or he is deciding whether or not they want to report, they will literally go through your company policy over and over and over again, because that is that document that they will have at that point in time that will either discourage or encourage them to do that report. So having that policy and procedure is important because it is your first most basic assurance that you give to the employees as to whether or not you will take this seriously, whether or not you will handle this with respect, with dignity, with impartiality, objectivity, and all of that. So that is very important. And of course, pick up culture is how you behave as the role that you are playing. So for example, if you're a managing partner and you call yourself a feminist, but you make fun of women, believe in patriarchal values and things like that, then obviously you're not really creating a good culture no matter what you say, right? Because people watch you as a boss. And your action is very, very important. And lastly, your personal attitude, the way you deal with it yourself as an individual. And I think that ending this talk here, I want to just highlight that it's okay to make mistakes, in the sense that we are all learning, like sometimes we make a comment and someone's like, hey, that's such a sexist thing to say, or that's actually sexual harassment. People make mistakes because of course we grow up with certain values, certain things being instilled. We pick up different things from school and from our parents, from TV. But it is very important that when someone points out to you that you have done something wrong, it is important to not be defensive and say like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. I'll think about it. Thank you for letting me know about that. I think that is in itself a very important step in creating a workplace culture that is more open and productive for everyone involved. And I hope you've managed to understand the topic a little bit better. So I'm gonna end my session here and pass the floor to you can for Q&A right now.
Hi, thank you so much, Amelia. I learned a lot today. So the first question that has been put is, with regards to anonymous complaints, how do you balance the rights of the complainant and perpetrator's right to answer the complaints against him?
Okay. Actually, whether or not the complaint is anonymous or not, it is always very important to balance out the interests of both. Of course, you don't want to throw someone under the bus by relying on something that is not reliable. So the way we deal with complaints, if it is anonymously, is usually I divided it to two categories. The person could be completely anonymous. That means as an investigator or as a boss, I myself do not know who that person is. But there's a second category, that is the person comes forward to you but asks you to keep their identity anonymous, in the sense that you will not reveal to anyone. So to more specifically answer the question, the way you balance out both parties' interests in the situation is to make sure that the perpetrator has the opportunity to properly and meaningfully respond to the allegations being made against him or her. So they don't need to know who's saying all of this. They just need to know the facts that they need to respond to. So you could change the name from, if my name is Amelia, you want to change it to, I don't know, Atika or whatever. You got what I mean? You can always change the name because it is just a name. At the end of the day, what the perpetrator needs to fully defend himself or herself is to know exactly those allegations being made, the details of the allegation, and that details is something that the perpetrator should have the opportunity to respond to. And obviously, just with our pleadings, usually we will allow the complainant a reply to that defense. But for me, usually I will allow the parties to reply as many times as they want, because I'm so sorry if you can hear my cat.
No, fine.
But I usually don't limit it, because for me it's important to let them respond to it, because you don't want any of them to feel like, oh, you're not hearing my side of the story, right? So repeat the process as many times as possible, because we are not the court. I'm talking about this in the context of an internal organization. So do whatever you can to make sure that both parties feels like their stories are being heard and are being treated equally. And I want to also go even say that the protection that you give to the complainant, you give the same protection to the perpetrator as well. So if you give assurance like, oh, we will protect the privacy and identity of the complainant, then you should also protect the privacy of the perpetrator, because obviously, especially when investigation is still happening, it's unfair for the perpetrator to have to go through certain things that tarnish their reputation and things like that. But upon having a decision, it is important, for the sake of transparency, for certain information to be disclosed to everyone in the firm. So that's a difference between the two of those things. I hope that answers that question.
Yes, thank you. But I'm also wondering, if someone remains completely anonymous, and as an employer, you want to encourage people to make complaints. So a lot of people feel worried about, it's embarrassing to tell the story, so we remain completely anonymous. As an employer, it'll be very hard, right, to deal with such a complaint if there's no reply and all that. So you can't do much, right?
Betul. It's quite hard because, like I say, belief survivor means that you make it as easy as possible for a survivor to make their case, to collect their evidence. You respect their time. You don't rush them. You don't push them and things like that, right? So not being able to do this investigation is very, 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 very difficult to come up to the decision. So usually what I will do personally is I will just reply to the complainant, and I will say, look, if you decide to remain anonymous, that is completely your call. We will respect it. But do know that in order for this investigation to be fair and in line with the principles of justice, there are just a few things that I need to do as an investigator. You lay down the things that you need to do, and you lay down the things that you need from the complainant, and you ask this complainant, would you be willing to just have a chat with me? I've actually, in a few of my investigation, I've actually asked the complainant to come and have a chat with me face to face. And then I anonymize this complainant. And when we are doing the presentation of the findings, I say, I have sat down, had a conversation with this complainant. I can vouch that this is a very real person. I can vouch that this is an employee of this organization. I can vouch because I know the identity of this person, that this person is real. But this person does not want any one of you to know that. So, there's also things like that you can do. So my best advice really is, if you're investigating sexual harassment in the context of, an organization, be as creative as possible so that the principles of justice are met, so that you respect people's boundaries and what they want. And I think as long as you can, it's basically like troubleshooting, really. So you just troubleshoot the best way to do it.
So basically, it's important that you create the environment that encourages the victim to go, look, you can come out to me, but I'll keep you and your details all completely anonymous unless I need to reveal the specific event and all that.
Yeah. So usually what I do is before I release the list of the facts basically for the perpetrator to respond, I will actually show it to the complainant first. I say,
Oh.
this is what I'm going to disclose to the perpetrator. Are you okay with all of this? So usually I ask them to consent at every stage. I want to release this. Do you consent? And then sometimes they will say, "Can you take out this part? If you put this part, then for sure he will know it's me." For example.
Yeah.
Then I will say, if I take out this part, boleh, but then this part cannot be part of the investigation because he does not have a chance to respond. Yeah. So it's always a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And also based on my experience, complainants usually are very reasonable people. As long as you explain the thought process, why you're doing something, you explain the principles, they usually will help you with the process because they're reasonable people. You just have to reason with them for them to be reasonable.
Correct. Okay, next question. Also, what can be done about firms where upon joining, all your seniors will say, watch out for partner A, be careful around him, and clearly management has refused to do anything about it?
This is so annoying to hear, but of course, I mean, it sucks for me to say this, but I think there's nothing much that you can do, especially if you're a junior, which is why the only thing that you can do is something that is a bit more drastic. And of course, then as a junior joining this firm, people are like, oh, be careful this person. And you're like, so your thought process is either betul ke? Like, is it even true? And B, you're like, okay, what do I do if it were to happen to me, right? And I think there's also like this layer of thought where you're like, oh, but I don't want to be that person who makes a big deal when everyone else just live with it, right? So all of this is difficult. So my advice is usually if you're a pupil, talk to your master about the situation, and hopefully your master isn't that person. If your master is that person, you can obviously talk to someone that you trust in the firm. I don't know if what I'm saying is really out of touch with reality, because I was quite lucky that I had a very good relationship with my master. He was very supportive of me, and really any issues I have, I will go and talk to him first. And I think you can try and do that. Or if you're like a junior associate joining and you don't have a master, for sure you will have the head of the litigation team or the corporate team or whichever team that you're in. You can try and establish that relationship. And I think talking about it is important because it's a skill, to highlight it. You say, hey, when I joined in, all of these things were said to me. I feel quite uncomfortable. What's your advice? You could try and do that. Or if you want to wait until something happens first, that means you don't want to have this conversation because you think probably it's premature to talk about it now. And you wait, and then something happens, and then you have to highlight it to someone, because if you remember my 4 steps, conversation is important because people can't read your mind, and you also need to give people the opportunity to react and to deal with it. And I think informing the organization is one of it. And if you have done all of that and everyone seems to be protecting this individual, then you probably want to try lodging an official complaint with the HR, because they may be able to ignore your just you highlighting something verbally, but it is quite hard to ignore an official complaint. And if they do ignore an official complaint, I think that's pretty bad. And I think, I don't want to say this here and now, but you can always escalate it. You can talk to DB, although, we are still questioning whether or not that is the best way to bring a matter forward. But you could talk to DB, you could talk to, the committee, like the committee members. And I think usually someone will be able to help you and figure out what to do. A worst case scenario, if you really want to take it up because what you've gone through is really traumatic, of course, then legal action is also available to you. But what I'm saying is there are different things that you can try first that doesn't cost as much money or doesn't take as much time from you, and do explore those options.
But I also think the employer has the onus, especially in a big firm, I think, to establish, as you say, like a policy or a culture where, this is completely stamped out. Because I believe in Malaysia, I think we're a bit slow on that front. People don't discuss sexual harassment as much as and if it happens, it's hidden under the carpet. So So, from your experience, do you think Malaysia is moving forward? Like, are employers now more active, or it's not moving as fast as it should be?
It's not moving as fast as it should be, for sure. It's moving in the right direction, but sometimes I also muscle an organization where I feel like, wow, this is like a 5-step backward kind of situation, you know. Most of the organizations I work with, they'll be like, oh, we do have a policy. And then you read the policy, it's nothing, you know. And a lot of, I think, bosses hide behind the fact that there is a policy to create the impression that they care about it or that they're doing something about it, which is really annoying. So I think be honest with yourself. If you're a partner in a firm, like, do you really take it seriously? Do you really have a mechanism? So if someone today come to your office and say, a big partner in the firm sexually harassed me, are you prepared? Are you prepared to investigate? I'm not asking you, are you prepared to take actions? I'm asking are you prepared to investigate? You know, because that's the bottom line. If you're not prepared to investigate, then you have to educate yourself and sensitize yourself. Because so many people said to me things like, but you know, I've known this person for so long. He is a little bit like that, but it's harmless. Unfortunately, it's not for you to decide whether or not it's harmless. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you're right. Having a policy is very important. But it is nothing but the bare minimum.
Okay.
Bare minimum, yeah.
All right. Next question. In the definition of sexual harassment, if the unwanted element has to be from the point of view of the victim, does this apply to situations where you witness an action that is clear sexual harassment, but the victim has not expressed that it is unwanted, maybe out of fear of repercussions? Can or should you still make the complaint?
Okay, so this question is obviously from the perspective of an observer, right?
Yes.
So I usually feel like you should get someone's consent before you report something involving them.
Okay.
Because this is like outing someone's
story.
Ready to be outed, you know, their story. They're not ready to come forward with their story. You don't want to push it onto them. So usually, like I've been in this situation myself where I see someone clearly being sexually harassed, and I have this chat with this person, like, you know, like, how do you feel? Are you okay with this? Or, you know, if you think it's just a joke and you're okay with this, then it's fine. It doesn't have to be a big deal. But if you're obviously affected by it, then, you know, are you ready to take an action? Then if this person said, I'm not ready, I'm still whatever, then you probably just point this person in the right direction, seek counseling, or talk to like, you know, a circle of survivors where they can share their stories and, you know, things like that. So I usually would advise against reporting because I'm very worried about someone's state of mental health if they're not ready. But it's not wrong for you to do that. If you feel like, yeah, this person is not ready, but this person has to be stopped because I know 3 other person that have gone through this, and no one want to report, and you want to be that person, go ahead. Like really, even ethics is on your side, you know. So for me, it's always your call.
Okay.
You decide based on the circumstances and the facts available to you. If you think the benefit of reporting yourself outweighs the harms
cost on the victim,
go ahead and report it. Yeah.
Okay. From your experience, if there's a third party that makes such a complaint, but the victims all don't want to come out, it is difficult, right?
No, I have done a couple of investigations and advised a couple of organizations on a situation like that. What we did was we got all of these complaints. At that point, obviously, they were office rumors, right?
Yeah.
And it's just so happened that the boss of this organization was just very, I think she just worries about things like this, and she takes it very seriously. So when she heard of the rumors, she was like, oh my God, is this true? Like, if this is true, we need to do something about it. And then we had a chat about it, and we realized that, you know, this is just an office rumor for now, so we have to create a process to formalize it at least as a complaint. So what we did was we had like anonymous survey forms. We conduct interview with those people who are willing to talk. So these people may not be the victim itself. So at that point, we were presented with 2 opportunities. One, we could either treat it as an investigation against a named perpetrator, or we could treat it as an exercise to improve the workplace.
Mm.
You know,
You frame it differently.
yes, you frame it differently. So the latter means that you don't have to pin it down onto certain perpetrator. So, and I've done both with different organization. And usually if you do decide to, like in that example, when we did decide to, pin it down on the person, it was because the details of the harassment was pretty horrid.
Oh, okay.
So we did decide to, arrange a process surrounding identifying that perpetrator and confirming the details of the harassment. But the latter one is more of like sensitization training for everyone in the office, laying down what's acceptable and what's not, doing exercises to build trust. We upskill the HR, we give them training to deal with like first responder to complaints and things like that. So yeah, it depends how you deal with it.
Wow. Okay. I think that's all for the questions. Let me just see on Facebook as well. Yep. I think that's fine. In that case, Amelia, I would like to thank you so much for helping us today. Honestly, I've learned so much just because I've never really spoken to someone with so much experience on how to deal with complaints at a workplace. And, I come from a small firm, so obviously we don't really have such a mechanism. So I think it's very important that, someone comes up with a policy. So on behalf of Jehovah, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry if the session is not as smooth, because usually I prefer to interact
Yes,
with,
yeah.
With the audience, but I can't even see the faces, so it's really awkward for me actually.
Correct. Yeah, that's the limitation of webinars. But yeah, thank you so much anyway. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Have a good Friday. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.